Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. No guest this week. Had a couple have to reschedule, unfortunately. So it is Sunday today as I'm recording this. So you'll probably listen to this the following day, which is all good. I'm essentially going to take a couple of pieces of my recent content that I've done and do it in a podcast format for you and kind of let me just talk and elaborate on it, on things a little more. And it'll also mean I can answer any questions that come through on the YouTube chat if there are any. Before I go into all of that, though, it is the last week to sign up for the conditioning mentorship with myself and Dr. Andrew Usher. There are 4 spots left. This will be the last conditioning mentorship we do this year. So it's 8 weeks long. Let me try and explain it a little bit just before we go into this, just to give you an idea if you're not too familiar. But essentially, it's 8 weeks, course material every week, 2 live calls a month, so 4 live calls total as a group. You have full access to any of us at any time, and essentially you're going to learn everything you need to know to be able to implement, individualized conditioning that is not being done anywhere else in the entire world. And I don't mean that lightly. It is really not being done anywhere else. And this podcast is going to highlight some of that because I'm going to give a little case study of implementing some of this stuff with a jiu-jitsu athlete on short notice for the CJI Giles trials for a super fight there, which was actually quite interesting. I just did an Instagram piece on it. Didn't do very well for some reason, but that's how it goes. So I'm going to give it to you in some of the podcast format as well. So yeah, make sure that'll be down in the description if you want to get on board. I'll put the email link on my website, which essentially, if you put your email in there, I'll send you the sign-up link, but I'll send you a bunch of information. If you don't want any of that crap, you just want to go straight to the sign-up link, I'll also put that link down there too, so you can just go straight to the page if you want to sign up. But 4 spots left, and we start at the end of this week. So make sure you get in, because honestly, there's nothing else like it. Having gone through the first one already, and the members that we had in the first one, it was epic. And lots of guys starting to use these principles and these conditioning modalities and the way they're doing the testing and individualizing the training just from heart rate data. You don't need any other fancy equipment like NIRS devices or equipment that gives you power output and stuff, even though it would be nice. You can do it just off heart rate. It also means if you're an online coach, you can do it remote with other athletes, etc., which I'm going to show you in just a bit. So make sure you check that out. That's really important. That's one of the really important messages I wanted to get in this podcast. So let me look at my little PowerPoint here because I made a little thing. If you're watching this video, maybe I should share my screen. Okay, hang on. Let me do that. So if you are watching the video podcast version, let me do that. I didn't even think of this. Let's see. Share screen. Oh my gosh. Okay. I want that one. Okay, you guys should be able to see this. So I did a YouTube video of this, and I'm going to do essentially this is the podcast version of it for you as well. So Jared had 3 weeks notice. So Jared Dell, he fought on the CJI Giles trials in a super fight. He had about 3 weeks notice before this. We were doing some stuff beforehand and some sprint intervals, but we were really just getting to the point of dialing in his sprints. So this kind of just sprung up on us. So we did the baseline on the 24th. I think we did, if I can remember correctly, I think we did a couple of days of baseline because the first one he did, I got him to video it and I could see he was pacing himself in that video. And if you pace yourself on any of these, you're not getting what you need to get out of them. So that's why we make sure we kind of do the baseline a few times. So it takes sometimes, if it's relatively new, it can take a bit to get used to, because you often see prescriptions when people are talking about, hey, I'm going to give you sprint intervals, and it's like 10 sets of like 40 seconds on or whatever it is, 30 seconds on and 20 seconds off. And it's like, man, if you actually went to max effort on all those sprints, you just wouldn't be able to get through it. A lot of those prescriptions. So a lot of people pace themselves, which means they're not really doing sprint intervals. So anyways, this is the heart rate graph of his taken from his testing. You see there's a nice on phase here. Then we have the recovery between the 2 sprints. If you're listening to this just the audio version, I'm going to try to explain it as best as possible for you. I was just going to do audio on this anyway, but I just realized I could share my screen. And then a little downwards. Now, what's interesting is in between the 2 30-second sprints and the 60-second recovery, typically we like to see a nice kind of like downwards recovery, right? We want to see this nice shape, almost like little rolling hills we want to see with the heart rate. But this one, it kind of comes down a little bit, maybe a few beats, and then comes back up and then goes down again, which is not something we really want to see within those baselines. So if you look at the recovery between sprints, so in the conditioning mentorship, I actually show you how to do all this. This is really cool. So each of these dots is this is the heart rate. The dots are essentially the heart rate, and we've fit a polynomial regression to this. So essentially just a line of best fit, really, if you want to do that, that would model heart rate. And the red dots equals bad, quote unquote, and they're above the line because they're slow, and then the green dots underneath the line are fast and they're good. Ideally, we want to be as close to the line as possible, and we want to have as much green as possible. We're not going to have all green, which is fine, but we want to maybe have green in certain areas, for example, at the beginning, because we want that very fast recovery just as we finish doing some kind of work. Now, you can see in this graph, and for those listening, the dots don't stay that close to the line. You see a lot of deflection from it. So you have this very large slow component at the beginning, have actually a quite nice dip underneath, but then it deflects back up. It goes back above the line and goes back up, like I showed you in the original graph, and then kind of comes back down. So very choppy. The recovery is not great between. I mean, this is the 60-second-ish recovery, and we're looking at 3 beats. So even for someone like a high-level competitor, you'll find some of these potential issues. At the end of the sprint, though, looks really nice. A little slow at the beginning, but look at this. Nice green all the way through. The dots hug the line pretty nicely. And we get like a 10 or so beat drop in that 50-ish seconds or whatever it is. 12 beat drop in that 60 seconds, I think it is. So, that's pretty good. What we've talked a lot about the podcast is it's not about just the beats dropped. It's about the quality of the beats dropped. And when I talk about quality here, we're talking about essentially these dots on the line. So we want to be as close. We don't want those major deflections like we saw on this one. See, this would be bad quality, whereas this would be better quality. So bear that in mind as we go through. So we threw them in the deep end because we only had 2 weeks essentially, which is really interesting because typically you're told, oh, you only have 2 or 3 weeks to a fight. There's no point focusing on doing any strength and conditioning because you're not gonna improve enough in time for the fight, which is potentially not true. Based on this case study, based on the research we have currently on sprint interval training, you can make pretty good gains in 4 sessions, which is like twice a week, or if you're doing 3 in 1 week and 1 in the following week. If you have short notice fights, sprint intervals can get you where you need to go. So this is actually looks quite nice in terms of the overall shape of the 6 sets of 10 seconds on, 15 seconds off, because you can see first sprint, second sprint, third sprint, fourth sprint, fifth sprint, sixth sprint. So you can see the sprints in this. Obviously, if he wasn't a better trained athlete, because he's doing jiu-jitsu pretty much every day of the week. If he wasn't a better trained athlete, you'll probably see like this hill, and you'll probably just see kind of like this flattened out area up top here, where you wouldn't see these kind of little rolling hills that we want to see in these nice shapes. If we look at the in between, like this is sprint 3. Not so great in the recovery on this one, 1.5% reduction in heart rate per second, but sprint 4 looks actually quite nice in terms of how nicely it fits this linear regression here. 2.6% reduction in that little 15 seconds. And then this is the end again. Now the end always looks better than the rest, which I showed you in the other one too, because it's kind of like you finish your sprints, so you fully relax. And the goal of doing these sprints is we want to facilitate what happens at the end here and bring that into what's happening between our work efforts, right? Because we want to be able to, in a fight, explode, scramble, throw combinations, whatever it is, and then have that recovery to be able to do it again and again and again and again. And we want to be able to facilitate this kind of relaxation in between those. And that's kind of the idea of doing these sprints. So this is really interesting. This is a month later. So the 21st of May, the baseline tests were the 24th of April. This was the second test we did 1 week after the fight because his ankle was a bit swollen. And you can see here, this is the first one up top, as I mentioned before, with a little kind of increase in the recovery period. If you look at the second test graph, it comes up nicely. Then you have this nice kind of decline in heart rate, and you don't have that increase in heart rate within there. You also have a bigger drop. You go from about 185 down to about 175. So you have this 10 beat drop, whereas you had about 3 in the other one. You didn't even get it. get below 180, or he didn't even get below 180 in the first one. So that's quite interesting. And then when we come back up again, it's peak heart rate and then nice recovery. And if I show you the differences in the recovery between sprints here, see the first one on the bottom here, we have that lots of deflection, but look how much better this second baseline test is a month later. Like, yes, we have a little bit of a slow component at the start. For anyone who's just listening, we have like a much tighter fit to the line. We have a 10 beat drop instead of a 3 beat drop. And we have none of these weird deflections where the heart rate is kind of going back up and moving away from the line. And then this is just the end of it. Look how tightly it hugs once he's finished there. It's really nice. And a 13 beat drop in the end with much better quality. So let me exit this and stop sharing that screen so I can get back to what I was doing here. So, a really interesting, hang on, let me pull this. Really interesting little case study where you can do on a short notice, you can do sprints if they're individualized to what's happening with your data, and you can make really good improvements in those couple of weeks. And just, I think there was like 3 or 4 sessions of sprint intervals in that, and you can make these gains. And it's well worth doing because it's literally takes you 5 minutes to do them. And you're going to see recovery improvements between high intensity efforts, which is essentially combat sports summed up. So if someone says not to do strength conditioning 2 or 3 weeks out because it's, you're not going to improve, I would take note and think about there are ways to do it. There are ways to do it, and I've just shown you a way to do it, and it can be done. And there's really good, if you look at a lot of the sprint interval research, you see gains in a few sessions in terms of mitochondrial function, even time to exhaustion. So we see improvements in conditioning just from very short timeframes at very high intensities. So yeah, I mean, I think that covers everything in that case study. Again, if you really want to learn how to kind of analyze data like that, so you're not just guessing and trying to prescribe or do like anaerobic efforts or lactic this effort, lactic that effort, join the conditioning mentorship. I promise you it'll be the best investment in your coaching or as an athlete or just as someone who's really interested in this stuff. We had guys in the previous one that didn't even have sports science backgrounds, not even a coach. They're just a fighter and they joined. You don't even have to be in fight sports, any sport, because you can match what you're trying to do in the data to the sport itself. If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that, it's just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for 2 is actually for 1, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order Trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order. So anyway, I want to move on to another topic that I recently covered on a YouTube video. And I thought it was quite interesting because it kind of re-emphasizes the point that I've been making on this podcast and on all my content really around strength training. But this also ties into conditioning, which is quite interesting. And you often see the 2 extreme viewpoints on social media, right? You see everyone should be lifting heavy all the time, just get stronger, lift more weights, and at any cost, you just need to get stronger, and that's going to improve your performance. And then obviously on the other side, that's usually not on social media. It's we don't do weights because we're going to be stiff, sore, slow. That's going to make me too bulky. The usual stuff that comes through from that. And as always, the answer's somewhere in the middle, right? With pretty much everything. You should do strength training, yes, but just getting stronger, I don't think is the right answer. Especially not for striking and MMA. For Jujitsu is unique where there's so many, even just within such a new sport, there's so many different styles. And the game can be kind of, if you're really good, the game can be played to whatever pace or whatever you want to do. And just getting stronger in that essence can work to get, if you, especially if you like, say, like play like an old man half guard game, you know, like kind of that kind of stereotype, you know, just getting stronger is just going to benefit you regardless there, you know. If you're more of a, let's just say Andrew Tackett style, you're just 5 minutes of absolute insane movement, just getting stronger will definitely help you, but there's probably other things that you need to address to be able to, let's just say, have more transfer in that instance. So I did this cool little YouTube video. I'm going to basically go through it on the podcast for you, because I'm assuming that a lot of you podcast listeners don't watch my YouTube and vice versa. So if you are a podcast listener and you enjoy these, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and my Instagram, because I do a lot of, I guess, other versions of these as well and stuff like that. So check those out. But this is really interesting because there's a paper sent to me by Bill Smart, who's been on the podcast a few times. He'll be on again sometime soon as well. But paper by Jamie Douglas, Angus Ross, and James Marden, and it's on sprint cycling. It's called Maximal Muscular Power, Lessons from Sprint Cycling. And if you're wondering, what does sprint cycling even have to do with punching someone in the face or throwing them on the head? I'm just going to say, trust me, bro. So let's go straight through into some. I'm going to basically just speak some quotes from it and kind of explain it. And then there's a certain point in this paper that just like, it's there and I want to make that point hit home. But I need to go through this first, just so you can get, essentially just so I can set the scene. So as pedaling rate increases during cycling, a greater proportion of the duty cycle becomes occupied by the processes of activation and relaxation. And we've talked about activation, relaxation, even through the very single digit episodes of the podcast, which is about 2.5 years ago. And therefore, the role of activation, relaxation kinetics becomes increasingly critical to maximizing positive work and minimizing negative work. Now, let me kind of explain what that even means, because it sounds like a bunch of gibberish. Think of positive work. This is within cycling. It's when you're pushing down on the pedal. Let's just say from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And then negative would be the recovery portion from 6 o'clock back to 12 o'clock. For example, when cycling at 120 RPMs, a full pedal revolution will take 500 milliseconds, thus providing 250 milliseconds for the shortening contraction to generate force. So what's interesting about that is we often talk about rate of force development. And if you look at the research in striking, you have approximately less than 250 milliseconds to generate force. So we already seen some similarity between combat sports and some of the sprint cycling, I guess, in terms of application of force and time constraints. Now, they go on to say that even if rates of force development are high, the minimum time required to activate and relax muscle will compromise the attainment of maximum force and the total work that can be produced during a pedal cycle. Basically saying that the timeframes are so short to generate force that you're not going to be able to generate maximum force. There's a limit you can generate force in those short timeframes. The minimum time required to deactivate or relax muscle may be 4 to 6 times longer than that required to activate muscle. Accordingly, unrealized work resulting from time required to relax muscle is greater than that resulting from time to activate muscle. So unrealized work in this instance is just referring to the potential power that cannot be generated because of the physiological constraints. And so in this instance, the longer time to relax, and as the cadence increases, it becomes worse. So if that's sounding a little confusing, I'll explain it a little bit deeper soon, because as I go through this, it will start to make more sense, hopefully. So therefore, at most pedaling rates obtained within sprint cycling, the average force production over the pedal cycle will be substantially constrained by activation relaxation kinetics, with relaxation kinetics being the more prominent limiting factor. Calcium handling kinetics and cross-bridge cycling rates are the primary determinants of activation relaxation kinetics and are primarily fiber type dependent. Now, if you go back to the previous podcast with Dr. John Babro, we went deep on calcium sensitivity. If you haven't listened to that, you need to listen to that and probably listen to it again, because that is one of the factors that are not talked about when we're talking about our ability to essentially produce power. Now, calcium kinetics directly influences cross-bridge cycling rate. And again, sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but if we're going to put it really simply, we have 2 protein filaments, actin and myosin, and they slide past each other. They bind together. That's how the muscle contracts. For these to bind together, they need a switch, which is the calcium, but they also need to have a binding site to be uncovered. And what calcium does is it binds to troponin, which then removes the spiral of tropomyosin, and then the binding site is revealed and the switch is turned on. They bind together. Muscular contraction, we produce force. The better the calcium sensitivity, the faster you can activate and relax, and the more force you can produce for longer. And the fact that it's fiber type dependent is also gives us another clue to what type of training we need. So just remember that as we continue. But we're going to say that it seems that force-based determinants of power production are more modifiable with training than velocity and frequency based. So force-based meaning like maximum force or maximal force, rate of force development. Velocity frequency based meaning maximum shortening velocity, so contractile speed, activation, relaxation, kinetics, neuromuscular coordination, etc. This is what I really want to get to. Excessive attention to heavy and slow strength training in the absence of explosive movements seems to be suboptimal for power production, especially during cyclic tasks at high movement frequencies due to a slowing of relaxation kinetics. I love this little sentence. This little sentence sums up everything, essentially my entire philosophy around strength and conditioning that I've been trying to push through this channel, and they've done it in one sentence. So I could probably retire now. But I want to go through this further and unpack this for you as well, because I really want to get this idea that yes, lift weights and get stronger, but that is not what is going to get you to peak athletic performance. I know strength sports and stuff. I know people love like West Side and shit, and lift 500-pound squats and whatever. Cool, but there's got to be other things in there. And 50 to 60% 1RM speed benches for 8 sets of 2 is not explosive training. I'm sorry, but which brings me to this 1985 paper. It's by Hakkinen and colleagues, and they took subjects through 24 weeks of heavy squatting 3 times a week at 70 to 100% 1RM, including periods of eccentric overload. So these subjects got pretty brutalized with like a full squat specialization program for 24 weeks, which is pretty crazy. And, it's impossible to not get stronger doing something like that. Now, this was, I guess, backed up within the results. They grew quad size, muscle mass. They improved maximal isometric force by approximately 25%. But what was really interesting is the significant increase in time to 30%, 60%, and 90% of their max force increased, even though subjects could reach 3,000 newtons faster. So they could reach an absolute number faster because they were stronger, but if you looked at it relative to their max force, they couldn't reach submaximal levels, or they increased the time to reach submaximal levels of force, which probably isn't ideal when you're talking time-constrained sports like combat sports, right? You only have a certain amount of time to be able to apply force through striking movements or into an opponent. So we fast forward to a 2019 study by Tang and Martin. They redid this exact study, which is actually really fucking cool. But they added an explosive training group instead of just a control group. So the explosive training group performed 5 jumping exercises with body weight and with additional load 3 times a week. So they used like loaded jump squats, drop jumps, depth jumps, a couple of others, but essentially like probably one of the more intense jumping programs that I've seen. So it was basically a pure explosive training program versus a pure strength program, you could say. Now, the study, they used a computer model, but it had a near perfect fit with that 1985 paper. So, we're comparing apples to apples, essentially. And I'm going to try and summarize this as concisely as possible, because there's a lot that came out of this. And this is probably the most important part around this positive and negative work and this idea of activation, relaxation, kinetics from this type of training. So these graphs show, you can't see these graphs, but I've got 3 graphs here basically that show 3 different essentially frequencies or cadences. So in this instance, that's 1 hertz, 2 hertz, and 3 hertz. 2 hertz is equivalent to 120 RPMs on the bike, which is that 500 milliseconds to do the full cycle. 3 hertz is closer to 180, 190 RPMs, which takes, I'm extrapolating to about 300 milliseconds for the cycle. And then the 1 hertz I think it's around 60 RPMs. It's basically the equivalent to like a freestyle swimming stroke, so relatively slow. Now, what they found was that heavy strength training produced the greatest increase of positive power. So essentially, you could push the pedal harder than anyone else compared to baseline. And this improvement was due to increased force production. So we talked about how that is the most trainable, increased force production. Cool. We're able to see the greatest increase in power on the bike during the cyclic action. And this was consistent across all three frequencies. So even though they did lots of slow, heavy strength training, even at faster speeds, they were still able to produce more power than any other group. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the negative phase of the cyclic action of the bike, which is the pedal coming back up, heavy strength training resulted in greater negative work, especially noticeable in 2 hertz, the 120 RPMs, and then the 3 hertz, which is like the 180s, the very fast speeds. So essentially, as it got faster, the negative work got larger because it couldn't relax in time. So this increased negative work is problematic because it indicates the athlete is actively working against their own momentum during the recovery phase. Essentially, they have poor relaxation during the recovery phase of the pedal. And this heavy strength training, the benefits of heavy strength training are compromised, mainly from the greater deceleration during the later portion of the cycle, and then the reduced positive power production on the next cycle because of the subsequent stroke due to the braking effect during the recovery phase. And I'm going to quote the paper here. That is, muscles became stronger but slower to become activated and deactivated. Modeling revealed that this heavy training would have improved maximal muscular power by 13.6%, only about half as much as the increase in strength. Thus, the increased time required for activation and deactivation nullified approximately half of the expected gains in power. And if we go to the explosive training group, they showed moderate improvements in positive work without significantly increasing negative work. And I quote them, it produced a smaller increase in strength, only 10.8% versus 30% for the other one, but they had a beneficial effect of decreased time required for both activation and deactivation. We also see in the power frequency relationship, 16 to 18% greater in explosive training versus heavy strength training, meaning they could produce more power at faster speeds in the explosive training group versus the heavy strength training group. So what's interesting is they also model a hypothetical line, which would be essentially doing a bit of both, which most people should be doing. And they see increases in positive power closer to heavy strength training, and then reductions in negative work closer to explosive training. So essentially just kind of echoing a lot of my message on here. Now, the effectiveness of training methods varies with pedaling frequency. What works well at lower cadences may be counterproductive at sprint cadences. And I want to cover why this really matters to you as a fighter, because you might be thinking like, okay, it's sprint cycling. I don't really give a shit. That doesn't really make sense. But I would class striking and even shooting takedowns as cyclic actions. Because the previous paper that I was just talking about, they classed slip recovery as a cyclic action due to deflection extension action. So slip recovery, we're just talking about you're walking down the street and you slip on ice or whatever it is, but you don't fall over. You're able to recover without falling. And this action is relatively quick. I think it was 2.5 hertz. They put it in the paper. So it would be like above that 120 RPM on the bike. And I would class, say, throwing combinations where you got the flexion extension of the arms and shoulders. You've got the rotation as you're throwing, as you're setting up combinations, right? You're throwing your rear hand cross, and that already puts you in a position to come back and throw your lead hook. Same thing with kicks, same thing with takedowns. You're using that flexion extension to change levels. You're driving through to someone, you have that flexion extension as you drive through the opponent, turning the corner, whatever you're doing. So these are cyclic actions that you're performing within combat sports. Now, based on these papers, how quickly you can cycle through strikes and takedowns likely depends on the activation relaxation kinetics. And since striking occurs at much higher frequencies and speeds than shooting takedowns, it should potentially influence how much and the composition of your lifting sessions as a striker versus, say, as a grappler. Now, these are very, very general guidelines. So do not take them to heart. Do not take them and say, hey, James says you should only do X, Y, Z. Please don't do that. So for pure striking arts, you may spend less time lifting heavy weights and more time performing explosive movements. For example, a 25-75% distribution could be a general guideline for heavy strength for 25% and explosive training for 75% of the training week. Now, that's just simply because explosive training may better facilitate the relaxation kinetics, and specifically within type 2 muscle fibers, which is quite important. Pure grapplers may go the other way, 75% heavy strength training, 25% explosive. MMA fighters might have a 50-50 split. Now, these percentages, they may differ throughout a training year, depending when you have upcoming fights, the main focuses of the program, maybe what you're trying to individually improve within the training program. So if you're maybe you are a pure, like a boxer, but maybe you've never done strength training before, you've done very little, you've just kind of done circuit training coming through, then you might have a larger percentage, at least initially, get towards just basic strength training, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of what you need. Whereas if you're more, say, advanced in terms of your training age, you're already relatively strong, then you might look at some of these distributions. Now, man, my camera's going to overheat here. Did I use the other camera? And this thing's already, jeez, piece of crap, eh? One of these companies did sponsor me with a damn good camera. Anyways, carry on. If the camera goes out if you're watching the video, I'm sorry, but the audio still works, so we'll keep going. Regarding lifting frequency, 2 to 3 times a week is more than enough. Grapplers can get away with a bit more, just because they benefit from pure strength hypertrophy training. I'm sure you've seen, like, if you're a grappler and you're into it, and you've seen like Gordon Ryan, Nicky Rod, and all them do their strength training, it's basically bodybuilding. They're just that good at jiu-jitsu. The other thing we must remember is that everything is resistance training. So even grappling other humans is resistance training. We just can't measure it. And then this is what I wanted to get to a little further as well, which I didn't expand on in the YouTube video because YouTube video would have been too long and I would have just been kind of off topic. Just quickly in the chat, Daniel, hey James, big fan, been watching since you started your blog. Oh, man. Dude, that's like 5 years. I appreciate you staying through that long. I like it. So this is interesting around the bike sprints. So bike sprints, they're also resistance training. We need to remember and understand that just because something is classed as conditioning doesn't mean that you're not getting stronger or you're not doing strength training, because you are. Everything is strength training that you're doing. Throwing punches, grappling, all of it. The nice thing about bike sprints is they facilitate the relaxation kinetics to improve calcium sensitivity while improving mitochondrial function within type 2 muscle fibers. Now, based on the paper above as well, it seems that explosive training may potentially also help facilitate this calcium sensitivity through the relaxation kinetics. So there's a couple of things in there that if you're doing bike sprints and you're doing more explosive type training, you're really starting to develop or facilitate better activation relaxation than if you were doing, say, just heavy powerlifting style strength training in zone 2, right? You can see how those two programs are almost polar opposites in terms of the adaptations you're getting from them, which is why we're often doing a combination of all of it, because there are still adaptations you're going to get from some of these other training modalities that you're going to need at some point. And that's not to say, don't do heavy strength training. Still do it, because you still want to be able to essentially potentially improve the size of type 2 muscle fibers or neural drive. I've gone through, there's videos on the channel, I've gone through a whole lot of different adaptations. Can't even think of them off the top of my head right now. I wanted to come back to the idea of bike sprints. And this is something that I briefly talked to Bill Smart about, because he sent me that paper. And it almost gives some of the potential limitations with the assault bike or fan bike or spin bike, or whatever you want to not spin bike, the air bike, or whatever you want to call it. Where the air bike, because it's obviously wind based, you're not getting very high cadences on it, right? I think you're probably getting, I don't even know, I haven't actually looked at the RPMs when doing it, but you're probably getting up to like what, 90, 100 RPMs, maybe something around there. And if we look at like the activation relaxation kinetics of some of these, I guess if we go back to our graph, for example, like 180 RPMs, things become more, problems become more pronounced as the speeds increase. And perhaps if we want to facilitate better activation relaxation kinetics, maybe we need some kind of higher speed conditioning, if that's even possible. I know Bill's lucky enough that he's got he's got some fancy flywheel bike that allows you to get crazy speeds on it. And so, you can see like the power velocity relationship on there is pretty fucking sick. But yeah, it's kind of just food for thought, right? Like, yes, we can use the air bike, but maybe we need just maybe we just need to understand that there are limitations to everything we do, really. And that's just potentially one of those limitations within that. It looks like I've got little Mia here who wants to join me on the podcast. Luckily, we're just wrapping up. You're going to say hi, Mia? You're going to say hi? She's saying hi. Hi. Wait, I'm trying to find, I'm trying to finish, but no, all right. I'm going to wrap this up. Mia is in here, and please sign up for that conditioning mentorship. The sign-ups end very soon. We start this coming week. So we'll catch you all. I've got an epic guest lined up for next week, Dan Cleather. I'm going to talk everything Impulse and Force. It's going to be a banging episode. If you haven't read his books, you should. And we'll chat soon.